He thought he was buying time to secure his fortune. She thought she was sacrificing pride to save her son. But in 7 months, their contract would unravel into betrayal, obsession, and a truth that could destroy them both. The rain slid down the glass walls of Adrian Cole's office like a slow countdown, each drop reminding him of the seconds slipping away. He sat alone at the mahogany desk that had belonged to his grandfather, the man whose shadow he had never truly escaped. A crisp envelope lay open in front of him, its contents burning in his mind as though branded there. Marry before your 39th birthday, or the Cole fortune is dissolved into charity. His grandfather's voice seemed to echo from beyond the grave, stern and unyielding, just as it had always been in life. Adrian clenched his jaw. The old man had spent years teaching him that affection was weakness, that every relationship was a transaction to be negotiated. Now, even in death, he had orchestrated one final manipulation, forcing his grandson into the very institution he had taught him to despise. 7 months. That was all the time left on the clock. 7 months to find a wife when he had spent decades avoiding anything resembling intimacy. To him, people were deals waiting to be signed, problems to be solved, assets or liabilities, never partners, never equals. Marriage was not love, it was leverage, but leverage was exactly what he needed now. He rubbed his temples, considering his options. The press already buzzed with rumors after his lawyers filed the inheritance notice. Socialites he hadn't spoken to in years suddenly flooded his inbox with carefully phrased congratulations. He knew their interest wasn't in him, but in the billions attached to his name. Gold diggers, disguised as admirers, each waiting for their chance to cash in. The very thought made him recoil. And then he heard it. A muffled voice through the half-open door of his private hallway. It was late, long past when the staff usually cleared out, but the words carried clearly, cracked and trembling with desperation. Adrian rose from his chair and moved silently toward the sound. "Elena Ramirez, yes," the voice said in accented English, breathless, raw. "Please, I just need more time. My son's surgery. They said 200,000. I have insurance, but it isn't enough. I'm working every shift I can, selling everything. I can't let him." Her words broke off, swallowed by a sob. "He's only 7. He doesn't deserve this." Adrian froze in the corridor, watching the figure hunched over her phone near the service elevator. Elena. She had worked for him for nearly a year, her presence so quiet and efficient, he had barely registered her beyond the fact that his penthouse gleamed whenever she was on duty. She was small, with dark hair always tied back, her uniform plain, her eyes downcast in his presence. Until now. In that moment, her voice was stripped bare of pretense, a mother's terror etched into every syllable. Adrian felt something stir uncomfortably in his chest, something that wasn't strategy or calculation. He knew desperation when he heard it. He had bargained with it in boardrooms, wielded it against competitors. But this wasn't a hostile takeover. This was a woman on the verge of losing her child. Elena ended the call, pressing her palm to her forehead. She didn't notice him standing there until he spoke, his voice low, controlled, but sharper than he intended. "How much?" She startled, nearly dropping her phone. "Mr. Cole, What?" "The surgery, the hospital bills, the recovery costs. How much will it take?" His gaze pinned her, the same gaze that had broken CEOs across a conference table. Confusion flickered across her face, followed by embarrassment. "It's none of your concern, sir. I promise it won't interfere with my work. I asked for a number," he cut in, stepping closer. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. 200,000, maybe more, but that's impossible. I don't expect— "You'll have it," Adrian said flatly. He watched as shock widened her dark eyes. Before she could speak, he added, "On one condition." Her fingers twisted around the strap of her cleaning bag, knuckles white. "Condition?" He exhaled, feeling the weight of his grandfather's words like chains tightening. "I need a wife. For 7 months, purely business. You'll play the part in public, dinners, events, family appearances. At the end, we divorce. You'll walk away with the money you need, more if you want." The silence that followed was heavy, filled only by the faint hum of the city outside. Elena stared at him as though he had spoken a foreign language, her face flushed with indignation and disbelief. "You can't be serious. You want me, your maid, to marry you? Like some kind of contract?" "Yes," Adrian said without hesitation. "That's exactly what it is. A contract." Her breath came in quick, shallow bursts. She looked toward the elevator as if considering running, then back at him, torn between outrage and the flicker of hope she couldn't hide. He saw it, the instant her maternal instinct battled against her pride. "This is insane," she whispered. "Perhaps, But is it any more insane than watching your son suffer because you can't afford to save him? His words cut like a blade, merciless because they were true. Elena's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, her voice breaking. You don't understand. This isn't just numbers on paper. This is my child, my life. Adrian's jaw tightened. I understand leverage. I understand desperation. And right now, we can solve each other's problems. The air between them pulsed with tension. She was cornered. He was calculating, and somewhere in the collision of their worlds, the foundations of both their lives began to shift. Elena turned away, gripping the phone in her trembling hands. She could say no, walk out, and cling to her pride. Or she could say yes and save her son's life at the cost of stepping into a lie with the one man who seemed least capable of love. Her silence was an answer of its own, and Adrian knew, one way or another, her decision would rewrite both their destinies. The courthouse felt more like a cage than a hall of justice. Adrian Cole stood rigid in a navy suit tailored to perfection, a mask of control on his face. At his side, Elena Ramirez clutched a bouquet borrowed from a sympathetic florist, her simple cream dress borrowed from a neighbor who had insisted, something white, even if it's not a fairy tale. The echo of footsteps on the marble floor was the only music they had. The clerk read the vows like lines from a contract, monotone, efficient. Do you, Adrian Cole, take this woman? Adrian answered with a clipped yes, his voice smooth but cold. Elena's reply trembled. She didn't belong here, not in this building, not with this man, and yet here she was, binding her name to his in black ink. You may kiss the bride. Adrian hesitated, then leaned forward and brushed a formal kiss against her cheek. It was barely contact, yet the weight of it pressed on Elena like an iron brand. To outsiders, it looked nervous, sweet, maybe even romantic. Only they knew it was an agreement sealed, nothing more. Congratulations, Mrs. Cole, Adrian whispered as they signed the certificate. The new name made her chest tighten. She wasn't a wife, she was a placeholder. When they stepped outside, cameras flashed. News had leaked. Paparazzi shouted questions, their lenses hungry for a scandal. The maid turned Millionaire's bride. Elena froze like a deer in headlights until Adrian's hand closed firmly around hers. He guided her into the waiting car, his grip strong enough to look protective, but just tight enough to remind her this was not hers to control. The penthouse loomed above Manhattan's skyline like a fortress. Elena had cleaned these floors for months, but now she entered through the front doors as the lady of the house. Staff bowed slightly. Yesterday she was invisible. Today, every gaze lingered, curious, speculative, a whisper behind polite smiles. How long before this marriage crumbles? From this moment forward, Adrian said as he led her through the polished marble halls, they will treat you as my wife. Act accordingly. She looked around, uneasy. Chandeliers glittered above. The guest suite, her new room, was larger than her entire apartment. The bathroom alone could have housed her son Mateo's small bedroom twice over. She sat on the edge of the massive bed, dizzy. A knock at the door startled her. The nurse wheeled in Mateo, his small body pale from recent surgery, but eyes wide with wonder. Mommy, is this really our new house? Elena swallowed hard, pulling him close. For a little while, mi amor. When Mateo spotted the enormous teddy bear waiting in the corner, Adrian's quiet gift, he squealed, momentarily forgetting his weakness. Elena's eyes burned. For her son, this was magic. For her, it was a prison lined with silk. Days blurred, and the rules became clearer. They would attend events together, speak of each other with practiced fondness, smile on cue. Behind closed doors, their lives would remain separate. Adrian buried himself in 18-hour workdays, while Elena nursed Mateo back to health and tried to navigate this surreal new existence. The first real test came 3 days later, a charity gala, children's hospitals, ironically, where Adrian needed his new wife by his side. Stylists arrived at dawn, transforming Elena into someone she barely recognized. Emerald silk clung to her frame, diamonds glittered at her ears, and her reflection looked like a woman who belonged among the elite. When she stepped into the grand hall of the hotel, conversations halted, eyes turned. The maid turned mistress of Manhattan's most guarded billionaire. Elena's pulse thundered in her ears. You look stunning, Adrian said, his mask slipping just enough to reveal something genuine before it snapped back into place. They moved through the crowd like actors in a play. Smiles, handshakes, champagne glasses clinking. Adrian played the role of devoted husband with flawless ease, his hand resting lightly at her back. Elena tried to match his rhythm, but each glance from society's wives pierced like a dagger. So romantic how you two met. cooed Mrs. Patterson, a jeweled socialite. Love at first sight, I hear. Elena's lips parted, unsure what to say, but Adrian leaned in smoothly. Sometimes you just know when you've found the right person. His hand found hers under the table, squeezing gently. To everyone watching, it was an affectionate gesture. To Elena, it was a command. Play your part. The night stretched long, and by the end, Elena's cheeks ached from smiling. But as the crowd thinned, she caught Adrian watching her differently, not as a maid, not as a contract bride, but as a woman who had stepped into his impossible world without flinching. And for one dangerous heartbeat, Elena wondered if beneath all his ice, the man she had married might not be entirely heartless. But across the room, a flashbulb snapped. A journalist scribbled furiously, eyes gleaming. Tomorrow, headlines would scream, and the world would not let them keep this marriage a quiet arrangement. Their act had begun, the stage was set, and in 7 months when the curtain fell, either their lies would collapse or their hearts would. The city outside Adrian Cole's penthouse glittered like a promise he no longer believed in. Nights bled into mornings, mornings into endless meetings, and somewhere in between, he had acquired a wife he barely acknowledged when the doors were closed. To the outside world, they were dazzling. Adrian Cole, reformed bachelor, and his radiant, mysterious wife. Behind the curtain, the arrangement was suffocating in its silence. Elena spent her days caring for Mateo and walking through marble halls that still felt like they belonged to someone else. She reminded herself why she was here, that every night she tucked her son into a bed lined with silk sheets, she was buying him time, health, a future. Yet slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began noticing the cracks in the fortress that was Adrian Cole. It started with the food. He never ate properly. Plates of untouched meals went cold outside his office. Elena, exasperated, began leaving sandwiches wrapped in parchment, slipping them through the half-open door without a word. One night, she found the wrapper in the trash, empty, a small victory. Another night, she peeked in and saw him asleep at his desk, jacket crumpled on the floor, dark circles shadowing his eyes. She hesitated, then pulled a blanket over his shoulders. He stirred but didn't wake. "Thank you," he murmured into the darkness, his voice unguarded, almost boyish. For weeks after, Adrian stayed later in that office, not for spreadsheets, but to hear something unexpected, Elena's lullabies. Every night she sang in soft Spanish, her voice a ribbon winding through the penthouse halls, soothing Mateo's fragile heart. It was a sound Adrian had no memory of in his childhood. A mother's love poured into melody. He found himself listening in the quiet, restless in its absence. The staff noticed too. Maria, the cook, whispered to Adrian one morning as she set his coffee douse. "Your wife, she treats us like family, not staff. She helped me fill out my daughter's school papers. She's different." Adrian didn't answer, but the words stuck. The facade fractured further at a dinner party. Adrian had insisted Elena attend, an investors gathering in a room filled with men who measured worth by net profit and women who measured it by carats. Elena felt the eyes on her, sizing up the maid and borrowed jewels. A rival executive's wife leaned close, her smile sharp as glass. "So, Elena, tell us, what exactly was it about Mr. Cole that swept you off your feet? His billions or his penthouse view?" The table chuckled, waiting for the embarrassment. Elena's spine straightened. Her voice, steady but fierce, cut through the laughter. "Neither. What struck me was his drive, how he built an empire with no one's help, no safety net, just grit. That kind of strength is rare, and whether you believe me or not, it's admirable." The room fell quiet. Adrian's chest tightened, a sensation foreign and unsettling. She wasn't following the script. She was defending him, not as a contract wife, but as if she believed it. Later that night, on the terrace overlooking the city, Adrian joined her. The wind tugged at her hair, the skyline a blaze of gold and steel behind them. "You didn't have to defend me," he said. "I wasn't defending you," Elena replied, her gaze fixed on the lights below. "I was telling the truth. Even if I don't always like you, I can respect what you've built." He studied her profile, the way honesty shaped her features with a kind of strength that no diamond could match. "Most people don't tell me the truth," he admitted quietly. "Maybe that's why you're so lonely," she said, turning to meet his eyes. The words hit harder than she knew. Adrian looked away, gripping the railing. For the first time in years, he had no clever retort, no icy armor, just silence. But silence didn't last long, because as their contract arrangement wavered into something dangerously real, someone else was watching. A flash from across the street, a camera lens catching the two of them on the terrace, close enough to suggest intimacy. By morning, the photo would be plastered across headlines. The Billionaire and His Mystery Wife, Cinderella Story, or Calculated Lie. The world was circling, hungry for their downfall, and neither Adrian nor Elena knew just how much those flashing cameras would cost them, because the first sparks of something genuine between them had just lit a fire powerful enough to burn everything else down. The morning the headlines broke, Elena's world tilted on its axis. She was pouring Mateo's cereal in the penthouse kitchen when Maria the cook slid the folded newspaper across the counter. The Billionaire's fairy tale bride, Maid or Mistress. Splashed across the front page, Elena's face caught mid-laugh on the terrace beside Adrian, his gaze fixed on her like a man staring at something more precious than the skyline. The picture was damning, too intimate for a marriage born out of ink and signatures. By the time Adrian walked in, phone pressed to his ear, his jaw was set like steel. "Cancel all interviews, no comments," he barked, before slamming the phone shut. He barely acknowledged Elena as he strode past, but she saw the flicker of something in his eyes. Anger, yes, but also fear. Fear of losing control. The storm didn't stop there. By noon, tabloids were digging into Elena's past, her job as a maid, her unpaid bills, even Mateo's medical condition. Photographers swarmed outside the penthouse, shouting questions with cruel precision. "Did you marry for the money? How much is he paying you?" Elena tried to shield Mateo from it all, but she couldn't shield herself, every word cut like glass. At dinner that evening, she finally snapped a Bisan. "This is unbearable. My son is being dragged into this circus. This isn't what I agreed to." Adrian set down his glass, eyes glinting cold. "You agreed to play the part. Fame and scrutiny come with the role. I agreed to save my child's life, not to be humiliated by strangers dissecting mine," she shot back, her voice trembling. The argument ended in silence, the kind that echoed louder than shouting. 2 days later, the silence was shattered by a ghost from Adrian's past. Vanessa Carrington, his former fiancée, swept into his office uninvited, her designer heels striking the marble like gunshots. Tall, elegant, with a smile sharpened by envy, she carried herself like someone who had once owned the room and still believed she did. "So it's true," Vanessa purred, tossing the newspaper on his desk. "You actually married the help." Adrian's expression didn't flinch, but his grip tightened on the pen in his hand until it cracked. "You shouldn't be here." "Oh, but I should," she countered smoothly. "Investors are nervous, Adrian. They call me, you know. Old alliances die hard. They're wondering if the great Adrian Cole has lost his mind, or if you've simply been conned by a desperate woman with a sob story." Unbeknownst to them, Elena stood just outside the doorway, frozen, listening. Each word was poison dripping into her ears. Vanessa leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Don't tell me this is about love. You don't believe in it. You never did. Which means you married her for one reason, the inheritance. And when she finds out, she'll leave you anyway. Women like her always do." Elena stumbled back, heart pounding, retreating before Adrian could see her. The words gnawed at her, burrowing into insecurities she fought daily. Was she just a pawn in his game against his grandfather's will? That night, she confronted him. He found her on the terrace, arms wrapped tight around herself against the wind. "Why did you marry me, Adrian? Tell me the truth." His silence was unbearable. Finally, he said, "You know why. The contract was clear." "But Vanessa said—" "Vanessa," he snapped, stepping closer, "has always wanted control she never earned. Don't let her—" "Don't tell me not to listen when you won't even deny it," Elena interrupted, tears brimming. "Am I just your convenient lie? Was my son just a bargaining chip?" Adrian's face, usually impenetrable, cracked with something raw. "I did what I had to do." The words, meant as armor, landed like betrayal. Elena's chest constricted. She turned away, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't keep doing this if I don't know where the act ends and the truth begins." In the silence that followed, Adrian didn't stop her when she walked away. He didn't tell her that Vanessa's accusation had a sliver of truth, that he had known about her before the contract, that he had chosen her not by chance, but by design, because admitting that now could destroy everything. But secrets had a way of surfacing, and someone had already set the stage. A private investigator's report, her name stamped across the folder, waited, hidden in Adrian's office, just waiting for her to find it. And when she did, it wouldn't just shatter their fragile truce. It would expose the most dangerous truth of all. Adrian hadn't chosen her to save his fortune. He had chosen her because somewhere, long before she signed the contract, he had already begun to fall. The night she found the file, the penthouse was silent. Mateo was asleep, his soft breathing carrying through the cracked door of his room. and Adrian had vanished into his workshop downstairs, claiming he needed space. Elena had been searching his office for a document the nurse required. Something harmless, she told herself, when her eyes caught a leather folder on the edge of the desk. It was heavy, embossed with her own name in gold letters. Her stomach dropped. Hands trembling, she opened it. Inside were pages upon pages, photographs of her, hospital invoices, school records for Matteo, even grainy shots of her walking to work months before she had ever met Adrian. Each page screamed invasion, surveillance. At the very back, stapled together, was a private investigator's report. The date on the first page stopped her breath cold. 18 months ago, long before Adrian had approached her about the contract, long before she had become his maid. The papers fluttered from her hands like falling leaves. He had known. All along, he had known. She felt the air thicken, pressing against her ribs. Their marriage had begun as a lie, but now she realized it hadn't even been her lie. It had been his, woven long before she agreed to anything. The office door clicked open behind her. Adrian stepped in, shirt sleeves rolled up, grease streaking his fingers from the car engine he had been dismantling. His eyes landed on the folder, then on her stricken face. Elena, she turned, fury and heartbreak colliding in her chest. You had me investigated, before the contract, before any of this. You watched me like a project. Her voice cracked, but she forced it louder. Was this your plan from the beginning, to buy me? Adrian moved forward, desperate. It's not what you think. Her laugh was bitter, raw. Not what I think. You spied on me for over a year, Adrian. Every detail of my life, my child's illness, my debts, my shifts. You didn't choose me because of circumstance. You targeted me. I first saw you at the hospital, he blurted, his polished composure shattering. 18 months ago, you were with Matteo. He was hooked up to monitors, terrified, and you were reading to him, holding his hand, singing to him, even though you were shaking yourself. I'd never seen anything like it. You were... He faltered, the word catching in his throat. You were love, Elena, real love. And I couldn't forget it. Her pulse thundered in her ears. So you had me followed? I had my assistant find out who you were. When your application for housekeeping came across my desk, I didn't believe it was real. Having you here, even cleaning rooms you didn't belong in, it felt like fate. I never meant for it to become what it did, but when my grandfather's will surfaced, when the deadline came... He dragged a hand through his hair, undone. I panicked. I thought, maybe this was the only way I could keep you close. His confession wasn't comfort, it was gasoline on the fire. Tears streaked down her cheeks, hot with betrayal. You didn't want a wife, Adrian. You wanted ownership. You bought my loyalty, my dignity, my silence. And the worst part, you did it knowing I was desperate, knowing I had no choice. Adrian stepped closer, voice breaking. I was going to pay for Matteo's surgery regardless. Before I ever proposed the contract, I had already called the hospital. I swear it. This wasn't about leverage. It was about control, Elena cut in, backing away. That's all you've ever known. You control your boardroom, your empire, even your so-called marriage. And now you've controlled me. She pressed her hand to her chest, where her heart ached so violently it felt like it might tear apart. You've made me feel like nothing but a pawn. The silence between them was unbearable. Adrian's face, usually carved from stone, was raw with desperation. I don't want to control you, he whispered hoarsely. I want to love you, but I don't know how without ruining everything. Her tears blurred him into something unrecognizable. Then maybe you never really knew what love was. Elena pushed past him, the papers still scattered across the floor like evidence of a crime. She didn't stop when he called her name, didn't look back as she fled into the night, the city swallowing her whole. Adrian sank into his chair, head in his hands, surrounded by the wreckage of his truth. For the first time in his life, there was no deal to salvage, no contract to rewrite. There was only the hollow sound of the door closing behind her, and the knowledge that the woman he had manipulated into staying was gone, this time by her own choice. But Adrian Cole wasn't the only one haunted by the truth. Across town, Elena sat in a church pew, clutching her rosary with shaking hands, whispering to God not for money, not for survival, but for clarity. Because even through the betrayal, even through the lies, one devastating realization remained. She still loved him. And that love was the most dangerous trap of all. What neither of them knew was that the deadline, the inheritance clause, was closing in faster than either could bear. And the one secret hidden in Adrian's grandfather's will was about to upend everything they thought they knew about contracts, love, and power. The city pulsed outside like a restless heartbeat, but inside Adrian Cole's penthouse, silence reigned. The once immaculate rooms bore the mark of absence. Elena's laughter no longer echoed down the marble hallways. Mateo's toy cars no longer littered the living room rug. For the first time in his life, Adrian had everything he had thought he wanted: wealth, control, prestige, yet the only thing he could feel was loss. It had been 5 days since Elena walked out, 5 days since she had seen the truth in his office, the file that revealed he had known her long before she thought he had. Adrian had replayed that night 1,000 times, each moment sharper than the last, her eyes blazing with betrayal, her voice trembling with fury, her tears falling not for herself, but for the trust he had shattered. But now the clock was running out. His 39th birthday loomed only weeks away. If he didn't have a wife by then, his grandfather's fortune would dissolve into charity. On paper, the marriage contract still bound Elena to him. In reality, she was gone. He was in his workshop, dismantling an old Aston Martin engine with too much force, his knuckles raw from hitting metal, when a knock echoed at the door. He expected silence, maybe Maria with coffee. Instead, he heard the voice he had been starving for. Elena. She stood there, her hair windblown from the night air, her eyes tired but fierce. Her hands shook, but her gaze did not falter. "We need to talk." Adrian wiped his hands on a rag, afraid that if he spoke, the wrong words would drive her away again. She stepped closer, holding herself as though bracing against a storm. "I went to Father Miguel," she said. "I told him everything, the contract, the lies, the feelings I didn't want to admit. Do you know what he said?" Adrian shook his head slowly. "That love is always a leap of faith, and maybe mine was the biggest leap of all, marrying you. But you never trusted me enough to leap too. You tried to control the fall. You planned it, engineered it, watched me before I even knew you existed." His voice broke. "Because I didn't know how to deserve you otherwise." She looked at him, tears shining but unshed. "Then tell me now. No contracts, no timelines, no money. Tell me the truth. Do you love me, Adrian? Not the idea of me. Not the fantasy you built from hospital corridors. Me, the maid, the mother, the woman who never belonged in your world." The words left him stripped. "I love you," he said, each syllable jagged and raw. "I love the way you make coffee too strong. I love the way you fight for Mateo like a lioness. I love that you make this place feel like a home when it's only ever been a museum of power. I love you, Elena. Not the illusion, not the contract. You." Her breath caught, but before either could speak again, a sharp knock rattled the door. Adrian's lawyer entered, carrying another envelope, this one sealed with his grandfather's crest. "It's time," the lawyer said solemnly. "The board requested the final reading of the will's hidden clause." Adrian frowned, tension tightening his jaw. "Hidden clause?" The lawyer unfolded the papers, his voice steady. "Your grandfather's condition was not about marriage alone. He knew you would turn marriage into a transaction. The true condition was this: to inherit, you must perform an act of love that is selfless, irrevocable, and without expectation of return." The words stunned the air into silence. Elena's heart pounded. Adrian's breath stilled. The lawyer continued. "The trustees have reviewed your case. Mr. Cole, when you paid for Mateo's surgery before Elena had agreed to anything, without contract, without assurance, you fulfilled that condition. The inheritance is secure. The marriage clause was only ever bait. The real test was whether you could love without leverage." Adrian staggered back as if struck. He remembered the late-night call he had made to the hospital before Elena signed, the way he told them the surgery would be covered no matter what. At the time, he had thought of it as strategy. Now he realized it had been something else, love breaking through despite himself. Elena's eyes filled, not with anger this time, but with something more dangerous: hope. "So," she whispered, "you never needed me for the money." Adrian turned to her, voice unsteady. "I never needed you for anything but me, but I was too much of a coward to admit it." The silence stretched, thick with possibility. Then Elena closed the distance between them, her hand brushing his, tentative, testing. He caught it like a man clutching salvation. "Then maybe," she said softly, "it's time we start over. No contracts, no conditions, just two people deciding if this is real." Adrian's chest tightened with something he hadn't felt in years: peace. "Then let's decide together. Not for 7 months, not for an inheritance, for a lifetime." When he kissed her, it was nothing like the courthouse peck, nothing like the public displays for cameras. It was fire and surrender, pain and promise, the collision of two broken people daring to believe in wholeness. Weeks later, under the blossoms of Central Park, they stood again before a minister. Matteo scattered petals down the aisle, laughing as if the world had never known sickness. This time, there was no audience of paparazzi, no investors, no board, just family. "You may kiss the bride," the minister said. Adrian cupped Elena's face, his voice rough with devotion. "I love you, Mrs. Cole." Her smile trembled through tears. "I love you too. For real this time." Fireworks lit up the Manhattan sky as they kissed, sealing a union born in deception but reborn in truth. And somewhere, far beyond them, Adrian's grandfather might have smiled at last, because the empire had been secured not by contracts but by love,